welcome to the Motivational Millennial Podcast. I'm Ivy LeClaire.
And I'm Blake Brandis.
Today's conversation is inspired by the conversation we had last week with Laura Renner. So, Blake, what was your big takeaway from that conversation?
I really loved what Laura was saying about not sticking to the rules and the conventional wisdom that everyone says you should do, really about anything in your life. Specifically, she was talking about starting up her business, Freedom Makers, which is a awesome company where virtual assistants are helping small businesses, and these virtual assistants are often military spouses. And so they have the freedom themselves. They give small businesses freedom. And one of the things she talked about is coming out of business school, this perception that there is a very established path that you should go, and that's you jump out into an investment firm or a consulting firm, and then you start up a multi-million-dollar company, which then you flip after a couple of years, and then you retire and you do angel investing. And she said she wanted a different path. I found that really inspiring and a great reminder that there is going to be so much social pressure and maybe even familial pressure, maybe professional pressure to do what the established path is. And I think people are good intentioned when they're recommending you do that, because what they're saying is, hey, this is something we know will work.
Theoretically.
Yeah, exactly. And so you should do this thing that's safe and that's reliable, theoretically. And it's because people are good intentioned. But I think you can live your entire life trying to play by the rules and still be really disappointed, because there is no guarantee, even if you follow that established path. And so I was really inspired because I know in our business, we've had a lot of twists and turns of feeling like we should do the thing that everyone says we should do. And that's looked at a lot of different ways over the years, but whether it's how you should reach out to schools to book motivational speaking assemblies, or the kind of workshops you should do for companies to work with millennials. And it can be really muddy inside your head sometimes about, well, what is the right path? What should I do? And that's where I think that intuition really comes in, and listening to yourself.
Or just really even the whole path of being in a personal development profession, like being a coach, being a speaker. All of those things are so abstract that, it's been my experience that it can be difficult to explain what it is that I do in certain circles, or, to my folks who are thinking about more traditional paths. I think it's interesting because, these cultural expectations that we have are going to be different depending on where we were raised, how we were raised, our socioeconomic background, all of that, right? Because the safe path for us, and, the pressure maybe from our family or immediate friends, could be going to medical school. And that's sort of the expectation, or the safe path could be getting a managerial position at a fast food restaurant. And that was what your parents did, and that was what was safe for them. It's just so interesting because both of those are on what our culture in the US puts on totally different ends of the spectrum, but depending on how you were raised or your family or that sort of thing, that might be the safe path. And either way, if you diverge from that, either you diverge from the medical path by going and being an entrepreneur or, being an artist, or you diverge from the managerial path by going and becoming a doctor. Either of those things can feel like you are going against what is the norm for you and your family and the culture that you were raised in, and can be really challenging, in addition to all of the cultural pressures that we have in the Western world and in the US to be productive, and just all of these other messages. So I think it's really interesting to talk about what do those expectations look like, and how can you really honor what feels right to you and what is your path, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think there is a lot of perceived safety and stability in institutions, and whether that institution
Yeah.
is,
Yeah.
a
Institutions.
medical school or
Yeah.
whether it's a corporation. And I respect that. And historically, that was the case. I think about my parents, who my father's an English professor and my mother was a social services administrator. And they both had very secure positions and they had to work hard to get them. There were definitely
Hmm.
circuitous routes for them to get them. But once they did, the understanding was they could stay there as long as they wanted and they would be supported. And so I think for me, when I started to branch out on the music industry path and then the nonprofit consulting path, it felt very tenuous and unstable for them. And they're like, but there's no guarantee and you don't have
Yeah.
security. And I think that does point to a millennial difference, which is we don't believe that that security is real.
Right.
Not at a fundamental, like we expect that, yes, if you go into an agreement with an institution and they hire you, that they're going to uphold their end of the bargain in terms of at least whatever the term of your employment contract is. But we don't think they really care about us. We don't think they're really invested in us for the long term. And there are certainly exceptions to that, but I'm talking about as a generational perspective on why we would do something that feels and seems riskier from the outside, but that we feel might be more fulfilling for us personally.
Yeah, and it feels kind of odd to think about committing 30 years to one institution.
Sure.
In the way that our generation goes about careers, it's really not uncommon to shift organizations and companies every 3 or 4 years, unless you're able to really advance in a way that you're wanting to in that company. It's unusual to think about, okay, I'm staying at this place because I have this huge retirement package. And we've seen what can happen to, our family members where they committed that much time to an organization. And then there's layoffs. And it's so messed up because you are told, like, that day that you are being laid off, then you are escorted by security out of the building because they don't trust you to not, I don't know what, do corporate espionage and steal their stuff or whatever, So it can be a devastating betrayal. And, and some corporate policies are like, they won't rehire you. Even when they start to rehire again, they won't rehire you if you've been laid off, even though you didn't so it's just, I don't know. It is, I guess I feel passionate about this topic, but I totally agree with you in that it's kind of the cultural norm for us to do something a little bit non-traditional if it's something that we feel called toward. And, I really also want to honor people who like feel really called to be in higher education, right? And get to have that stability that comes along with it. I think on the flip side, sometimes this generation can put a lot of value on doing, I don't know, rogue type of activities. And
hyper individualistic, sure. Yeah.
Right. And not value in the same way jobs where you do have that kind of security. And I just think it's about really, to the whole point of this theme, which I don't believe I mentioned at the very beginning. But the theme it's a surprise theme in the middle. It's really about what are you passionate about and how do you embrace that passion? And we really saw that in Laura. It's about really honoring what you care about, no matter what sort of cultural expectations are being put on you, because you can look for validation or people against you anywhere. You can find, no matter where you're looking in your life, people who will support you and people who won't. So it's just really like focusing on what you care about and finding those people who are going to understand and support that path.
For sure. And that's a great nuance to, you're right, we're not dissing institutions, certainly. And
no, yeah.
I think statistically, the majority of Americans work for some form of institution, including the US government. So there are plenty of ways that path can be right for people. And to your point, it is about listening to what is true for you. And that may be wonderfully in alignment. I think there is a push for this entrepreneurial, self-determined, really American pioneer idea. I think is how far it goes back. We're the frontiers people, and we've made it on our own, and we do what we want, and we go where we want. And that certainly has an allure, but that path is not right for everybody either. I think knowledge of self is definitely true. And thanks for pulling us into the theme of passion and self-determination. What struck you during the conversation with Laura about cultivating your passion?
Well, I really like this topic because, something that's a big value for us, you and I, Blake, is that people live lives that are fulfilling to them, no matter what that looks like, even if it takes time, perseverance, financial energy, emotional energy. We really want for people to live lives that are fulfilling and meaningful to them. And so this conversation about passion, honoring your passion, is really great. And I really loved that Laura was talking about being multi-passionate, and how one of the ways that she grew after starting Freedom Makers is really honoring this idea that she is going to be a person who has multiple passions, and she may not need to incorporate all of her passions at once, but certainly several forms of it. And she talked about how that just became something that she really stood up for, even when she was working with, contractors and people who were supporting her and that sort of thing, is that she just was really like, I'm going to be working on multiple different things, and that's really important to me. I believe that I can move these things forward. And she's kind of going against some traditional wisdom of only focus on one thing at a time. That's one thing that she was talking about. So I really appreciate this because I do think, it's important to trust yourself, and that for some of us, I know, myself included, and I think oftentimes, the entrepreneurial spirited people, or people who are really creative, and, you can have that sort of shiny object syndrome and want to start a new business or a new project or a new et cetera, et cetera, et cetera in your life. I think it's important to provide space for it. I think it's really cool the way that Laura found space for it in her business. For me, I like to find space for those kinds of activities in my spare time too. So I am aware that I really love novelty in most areas of my life. And so if I start a hobby, I am well aware that I'm going to do that hobby for a couple of months and then want to do something else. And when I finally allowed that space for myself and just said, okay, this week I want to make clocks, and now I want to build puzzles. Okay. And now I'm going to make jewelry, instead of expecting myself to want to make clocks for the rest of my entire life as my one hobby that I do. My hobby is trying new hobbies. You know what I mean? I just like learning and experiencing things tactily and, creatively and all of these things. And so once I made space for that, I am finding so much more fulfillment in my life. And so I really appreciate the honoring of that sort of need for things that you are passionate about, really honoring the fact that you might be passionate about more than one thing. And I think it's really cool how Laura brought that into her business in a way that feels really comfortable for her too.
Yeah, because in the total expanse of possible human experiences, we tend to only get the tiniest sliver because there is, I think, both a fear and an expectation. The fear is, I'm going to try this thing and be bad at it, so people might make fun of me or something. But there's also this expectation that if I do try something, it means I really have to commit to it. If you wanted to just go for a jog, let's just say you're not a jogger, but you just want to go for a jog. I think sometimes there can be all this pressure, well, but then I'm going to have to get specific running shoes, and then I'm going to have to commit to it 3 times a week, and then I'm going to have to build up to eventually doing marathons. And it's you could literally just put on some tennis shoes and go run out the door for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
One of my New Year's resolutions for this year has been to work out every day. And my commitment to doing that was working out every day has no time expectation or activity expectation. So it could be 5 seconds, like literally lifting a weight once with each hand. That could be my workout for the day. Exactly. Because I had to lower the expectation, because otherwise if I told myself I have to go to the gym every day, I'm probably not going to do that. Life is crazy. But if it's 6 p.m., I can say, all right, I'm going to do 20 minutes of push-ups and sit-ups before dinner. I'm going to do 15 minutes of just lifting dumbbells when I have a break in between calls. By scaling it down to something that's achievable, it actually makes it so much more fun. And now I don't feel pressure. Now it's almost like a game. It's like, oh, when can I slot this in? And rather than feeling stressed out about how much time I have to spend, it's almost like the game has reverse engineered it. So it's like, I want to spend as much time as possible. It's like, can I pull off 30 minutes? Oh, I've only got 20 minutes. So I think it's really about, again, listening to yourself and adjusting the expectations that you have around what it means to be multi-passionate, what it means to have these different interests, and what's possible. Like, so often we think if I like multiple things or have multiple interests, that means I have to pursue them all as a career. And you just beautifully said, no, you can make clocks for a week. You can do puzzles for a week. You can play an instrument. You can take a dancing lessons. There's so many different things you can do that don't have to specifically be monetizing the idea or the passion that you have.
Yeah, I think it's really cool that you've got a multi-passionate workout regiment or something, because that way you can do like, okay, I'm going to go for a jog now, and now I'm going to lift some weights, and now I don't know if you're like, I'm going to do burpees or what, but that's really cool. And one thing that I have really learned about myself in allowing myself to explore different hobbies and things that are really cool to me is that I cannot do a bunch of research on that particular hobby ahead of time. I actually do much better when I go to a craft store like Michael's or something, and I just wander through the aisles making up. I mean, that's how I came up with the clock thing. I just saw that there were pieces of clocks there, and I found a cool piece of wood, and just, I just made all of this up in my mind. So I found that if I go online and I were to research how to make a clock, like, my perfectionist brain would kick in, and I intimidate myself so that I don't end up doing it. It's like, like you said, I'm not going to be good at this. Right. So what that has resulted in is I've done so many more things, created so much more, had so much more fun exploring and just allowing myself for it to not be great. But also that's resulted in I've made jewelry and necklaces that ended up breaking, and I've had to restring them because I had no idea what I was doing other than just looking at the items that I thought I needed at the store. I didn't Google it or anything because I knew that if I went to that hole of trying to make it perfect the first time, I wouldn't do it. So I don't know. I think that's one thing, is that just try it, just have fun with it, just play with it, and if you can put that into your workout space or your hobby space or your, work environment, if you have lots of things that you are passionate about, I don't know, I think that's a good thing. And I think that that's pretty awesome.
Totally. And if it's not perfect, then you learned something from that too.
Yeah.
Like you said, you learned how to restring jewelry. I remember at some point in my music industry career, when I was producing music, there's this thing called a click track when you're recording that just keeps the tempo of the song. And so if you're recording multiple instruments at different times, it makes sure everyone's on the same beat. And there was this one time I remember where it was just acoustic guitar and voice, and I was like, oh, I don't need a click track. Let's just do it live. It'll be really awesome. And I was like, everyone's always so obsessed about having everyone play to a click track. And we did the recording, and I remember going back and listening to it later and being like, there was one string on the guitar that was out of tune, and we actually needed to go back and replace the guitar part. And I was like, well, this is why everyone yells all the time about doing the click track, because now I was like, oh, it sounds so great. But of course, at the time, I didn't realize there was this problem with it. And so I learned something that day that has really helped me in the future, because there have been times when I was like, oh, I'll do it without. I was like, no, always, you never know why. And sure enough, like every single time I've questioned it, I've ended up needing that click track later. And so all that to say, mistakes are really helpful about learning what works and why it works. And I think you're right. Just jump in.
Yeah,
just make it happen.
And the other thing that you're learning through making mistakes is that it's okay to make mistakes, right?
Yes.
I learned when because when I was making these necklaces, to string them on, I bought wire that was gauged. At the time, I didn't realize this, but it was gauged like so thick because it was meant for like doing jewelry wrapping around like stones and things like that. So it was like this really, so like I like made this really thick jewelry that basically just like chinked and like broke and all of this stuff because it was supposed to be like a million times thinner. And I will say to you right now that I'm grateful that I know that information now, but like, am I mostly ever going to need to know that again? Maybe not my whole life. But what I did learn was that I'm really comfortable with just kind of winging it. And I had a lot of fun winging it. I made some really beautiful pieces. And if I need to go back and restring them later, then fine, it's cool. Like no harm done. I created more than I would have created if I had talked myself out of it. So that was the biggest learning that I had from that. Not necessarily like, okay, I need to get point whatever. I don't know. See, I don't remember string, but it's just, it's okay to make mistakes, and I will actually have more fun doing rather than just like hiding on the sidelines because I'm afraid to fail.
It's important to make that distinction because there are a few careers where precision is vital, right? Surgery, airplane flight and construction.
Right.
Like there's certain things.
You still won't have the expectation that you're going to be perfect at it when you start.
Oh, for sure. And I'm saying even at the highest level, you need perfection in those areas just for human safety. But in 99% of most everything else we do every day in our lives, perfection is an unrealistic standard. Now, you want to be reliable and have a certain degree of quality and a certain expectation that people are going to be delighted with whatever it is. But people are not delighted by perfection, right? They're delighted by anticipating their needs. They're delighted by things that make them feel happy and significant. They're delighted by things that work the way they're supposed to, not necessarily work perfectly, but work the way they're supposed to, or do the thing they're supposed to do. And that's just a great reminder for me that so many things I get stuck on, I'm withholding value that people would otherwise get out of it. Like that's what I have to keep reminding myself. Me hanging on to my perfection is not saving this perfect thing to give to the world one day and they're all going to be so happy it's perfect. Like most of the time, people are just happy you respond to them in a timely manner. So I think adjusting expectations is definitely helpful.
That's really cool. And I just think, overall, it makes life more enjoyable.
Yes. Amen. Is that a good place to end this?
Amen, brother.
Episode?
Yeah, I think so. I feel really good about it and just really inspired by that conversation. So thanks for having a good talk with me today, Blake.
Thank you, Ivy. And thank you, our awesome Motivational Millennial listeners. We will catch you next week on the Motivational Millennial Podcast.
Bye. For show notes and previous episodes, or to learn more about our coaching and event offerings, visit motivationalmillennial.com. That's millennial, MILLENNIAL. Keep in touch with us at facebook.com/motivationalmillennial.
We'd love to hear from you. Shoot us an email with your thoughts, comments, and suggestions at podcast@motivationalmillennial.com. And tell us who you might like to hear from, or if you think you or anyone you know would be good for the show.
Our theme music was composed and performed by our very own Blake Brandis.
The Motivational Millennial Podcast is edited by Brittany Felix. Have a great week, Motivational Millennials!